Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you on the fourth day of Healthy Moscow Assembly. Let us applaud to each other and to our next speaker. Our fourth day is an incredible day. We've had an outstanding marathon. For those who have been visiting all 4 days, and for those who spoke on this stage as moderators, speakers, coming from 22 different countries all around the world. Today is a special day. It is open for all citizens of Moscow, as the previous 3 days. But today we pay special attention to you, dear friends, dear citizens of Moscow and guests of Moscow, visitors of Moscow. Every one of you can come to an open lecture and listen to very important information to which researchers and scientists have contributed a lot. Renowned people. So here we are here. All of us are different. Some are extroverts, some are introverts. So some people like to socialize with other people, some not. But human interaction plays a big role in our lives. Today we will talk about this human interaction in a human society, which helped build our current civilization. But before I introduce our next speaker, let us learn more about him by looking at the display. Nicholas Christakis, professor of Yale University, famous for his research in social networks, social, economic and biological studies, evolutionary studies, which affect health, longevity, and lifestyles of people. Obesity and smoking are habits that are developed through being contagious in social networks. He has been 2 times in the top 100 top thinkers of the world. Nicholas Christakis will give us a new lecture. The one who socializes survives. The origins of current society, of a good society. Please welcome Nicholas Christakis. Nicholas?
Before I start, one question. How do you like Moscow?
I am having a fantastic time, and I hope I can go to the new Tetracloth later today.
Thank you very much. Ваши аплодисменты, дорогие друзья. Please, you can start.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having me. I wish I could speak Russian. I can't, and I'm sorry for that. For too long, in my view, the scientific community and people on the street have been overly focused on the dark side of human nature, our propensity for selfishness and lying and tribalism and cruelty and violence. And the bright side has been denied the attention it deserves, because equally we are capable of love and friendship and cooperation and teaching. And these good qualities must have outweighed the bad qualities. Because if every time I came near you in our ancestral past, you were mean to me, or lied to me, or killed me, I would be better off living separately. We would be better off living as isolated individuals. But we do not do that. We live socially. Therefore, the benefits of a connected life must have outweighed the costs, and our species has evolved a particular kind of good society. And we've evolved not merely to live in groups, but rather in a very particular way, equipped with a very particular set of innate capacities. We're not simply like a herd of zebras, or a mass of crocodiles in a river, or a group of ants in an ant colony. We live socially in a particular way. And we manifest this social ability very early in life. Many have argued, for instance, that one of the primary functions of play in childhood is simply to prepare us for living together. Well, what kind of evidence could we use to figure out the kind of social order that comes naturally to us, that we are universally as human beings predisposed to make? Well, if you were a mad scientist, what you would love to do is take a group of people and when they were babies who had not been taught anything, and isolate them on some island far away, and leave them alone and somehow magically have them grow up to form a society. And then you would come back 20 years later and you would see, how did they organize themselves? What kind of society did they naturally make? And of course, it's impossible, it's cruel and unethical to do such an experiment, and it's been called the forbidden experiment. But such an experiment has been contemplated by various monarchs who have typically been interested in what kind of language comes naturally. So rulers for a very long time, for example, including Psamtik I, 2,500 years ago, and other rulers since then, have wondered, what language would humans speak if they weren't taught how to speak? And so they have done variations of this experiment where they have taken a couple of babies and given them to a mute shepherd to raise up in the mountains, and then come back a long time later to see what language did those children speak. But we clearly cannot do this. So what might be some proxies for such experiments? There are a number of possibilities we might consider with respect to natural experiments that might approximate the forbidden experiment I mentioned. For instance, consider the idea of shipwrecks, where people are thrown together without intending it and left to make society anew. Out of over 9,000 shipwrecks that occurred between 1500 and 1900, I was able to identify 20 shipwrecks where there were more than 19 people who were obliged to live together for 2 months or longer around the world. And they're shown here on this map. And I studied in detail what sort of social order they were able to make for themselves. And one particularly powerful example was 2 shipwrecks that occurred in 1864 on opposite ends of the same island. This is an island south of New Zealand, near Antarctica. And in that year, on the southern part of the island, 5 people washed ashore on the Grafton, were wrecked and spent 2 years there. And on the northern part of the island, 19 people on the Inverco washed ashore and were wrecked and spent more than a year there together. And those 2 crews had very different fates. On the Grafton, when the boat hits the shore, the captain is in his cabin with a fever, very sick. And the other 4 men make it to the shore, and the captain was going to drown and die. But the men decided that they would save his life, and they set up a rope between the shore and the boat, and at great risk to their own lives, they went back and forth and brought the captain to the shore. In the Inverco, the boat was destroyed within 2 hours, and 19 men made it to the shore. One of them was injured, and they were at the foot of this cliff, and they abandoned this man and climbed up the cliff. And of that group of 18 that was left, only 3 of them eventually made it off the island. But in the Grafton, all 5 of the men made it off the island, survived together. So these 2 wrecks had a very different fate, depending in part on what they did at the beginning. Were they able to work together? Were they kind to each other or not? Now, of course, it's not pleasant being a subject to these unintentional natural experiments. And still, the crew of the Grafton was able to build a dwelling, work together, and survive for 2 years before they made it off the island. And I also looked at other sorts of groups, for example, intentional communities, such as 19th century communes in the United States, where people deliberately set out to remake society, possibly in a new way. People have been doing this since Roman times. For thousands of years, people have been saying, society is messed up, I'm going to go with my group somewhere else and try again to establish a new society. And I looked at the Shakers and other communitarian movements in the United States, and at 20th century communes as well, and at kibbutzes in Israel, and at settlements of scientists in Antarctica. Over the winter months in Antarctica, a group of 30 people is typically isolated for 10 months. No one comes in or out, and they have to work together to make some kind of society. And I looked at online worlds where now with modern technology, people can go online and make some kind of virtual society, and at many other examples, such as nuclear submarine crews and prisons in Latin America, and miners stuck underground for months during disasters, and communities formed by displaced persons in the wake of natural disasters. And finally, I did experiments in my own laboratory where we created temporary artificial societies of real people. Over 30,000 people have come to my lab and played experiments where we engineer different societies and check what kind of social order is best for this group of people. And what I found is that there seem to be some deep and fundamental principles that constrain human beings to only one way of being social. And I'd like to illustrate this by reference to a very famous example of the world of all possible shells. In the 1960s, a zoologist by the name of David Raup became fascinated by shell morphology and whether it was possible to unify all the shells that had ever existed into one equation. And he devised the following way of thinking about it: arraying all the possible shells in a three-dimensional space that he called a morphospace. And if you look at this image, he imagined that there were three parameters, three numbers that could describe a shell. If you look, for example, on the far right, on the y-axis, is the distance of the curve of the shell from the axis. So this is like a coil of stamps. You know, if you have a tight roll of stamps, and the coil could be loose, spin way out, or tight. The axis, this is the distance of the curve from the axis. And on the x-axis is the translation rate in the front there. This is whether the coil moves up or down along the axis of a shell, like a spring. Is the spring compact or is the spring loose? And then finally on the z-axis on the far left is the expansion rate. This is how big does the opening, how rapidly does the opening of the shell, the cavity that the animal lives in, is it like a cylinder, like a tunnel, or does it get smaller and smaller as you go in? And with those three numbers, you could describe every kind of shell that ever existed. But what Raup found was that of all the possible space in that cube, only a small part of the shells had ever existed, as shown in the gray part of the cube. So many types of shells that were theoretically conceivable nonetheless never existed. Well, imagine that we define some axes for society, like we quantified how friendly is the society, how cooperative is the society, how unequal is the society, or how hierarchical is the society. And we measured those quantities and we created a cube again. What we would find is that only a tiny fraction of all possible societies had ever existed on this planet. So the question, so that all observed societies would only occupy a small part of this theoretical morphospace. The question is why? And the answer is natural selection. The key capacities that we humans have that universally characterize our societies and that we need so as to be able to form a functional society are identity, the ability to be unique individuals, love, friendship, networks, cooperation, in-group preference, we prefer the company of our own people compared to others, mild hierarchy, and teaching. And I call this the social suite. These are genetically encoded attributes shaped by natural selection that we express among ourselves, not as isolated individuals. All of these qualities require other people. You don't love yourself, you love others. You're not a friend to yourself, you friend to others. So these are all qualities that we express between ourselves. And indeed, they are adaptively useful, even crucial for making a society. And in fact, natural selection has shaped not just the structure and function of our bodies, not just the structure and function of our minds, but also the structure and function of our societies. These traits are universal. They are seen in every society. Let's look at a few of them. Well, one of the greatest paradoxes about mammalian social life is that the capacity to be a distinctive individual actually is an essential requirement for living socially. The ability to express and to recognize individuality only evolves when it's beneficial, and these two capacities are extremely rare in the animal kingdom. If you don't want other people to attack you by mistake, or to forget that they had sex with you, or to provide parental care to a different child and not you, or to neglect to repay your kindness, then it's advantageous to have some way of signaling, this is me, not someone else. Now, such social interactions require, in other words, that we have the ability to communicate our individuality. And in our species, we use our faces for this purpose. So think about this. Every one of us has a different face. Why? In principle, for our kidneys to do their job, all kidneys should work the same. They should be the same. But for our faces to do their job, all faces should be different. We don't all have just one human face. This is an evolutionary luxury, the fact that we evolved the capacity to have different faces. Not only that, not only do you all have different faces, but I can look out and I can tell the difference one from another. We have the mental capacity to tell the difference between other people. This ability to signal our uniqueness and to detect the uniqueness in others is very unusual in the animal kingdom, but it's universal in human beings. Love is another universal trait. Our species is very unusual among mammals in that we don't just have sex with our mates, we bond with them. We form a sustained emotional attachment to our partners. We love them. Now, we don't always love our mates, and we don't always mate with the people we love, but we generally do. And this is an uncommon, this attachment to the people that we are mating with is uncommon in the animal kingdom, but universal in us. And part of the reason for the evolution of love is that it actually enhances the survival of our offspring. And even though marriage systems vary around the world, as shown here, and include monogamy and polygyny and polyandry, the fundamental fact of bonding and love does not vary from place to place. Even in societies that have arranged marriage, where parents pick the partner for their children, even though in those societies love is not seen as a good way to choose your partner, even in those societies, however, love after marriage is seen as very desirable and fundamental and common. So even in societies with arranged marriage, love is seen as universal in those societies. Now, we don't just mate with each other, we befriend each other. Humans are very unusual as a species in that we form long-term, non-reproductive unions with unrelated individuals. That is, we have friends. And this is seen in every society. And the key attributes of friendship are also quite consistent around the world. And they include, for example, mutual aid. We help our friends. And we have a positive affect towards our friends. We feel good about our friends. We're happy when good things happen to our friends. We feel different about that than when good things happen to strangers, for example. Well, my laboratory has fanned out around the world to study friendship and distinctly to map the social networks that they give rise to. For instance, we studied the friendships among the Hadza hunter-gatherers of Tanzania. There are only about 1,000 Hadza left. They live like all humans did up to about 10,000 years ago. They live around Lake Eyasi in Tanzania, And what we did is we made a photographic census of all living adult Hadza, a kind of Hadza Facebook. And we printed all the photographs of all living Hadza on posters, and we took the posters to Africa, and then we had to find the Hadza, which was not easy. You can't make an appointment with the Hadza person. You have to sort of wait till someone walks by. And then when they did, we asked them, "Excuse me, who are your friends?" And they identified their friends. And then we waited till the next Hadza person walked by. That could take like a week. And they said, "Excuse me, who are your friends?" And we did this until we mapped the social networks of the Hadza. And we found that despite the fact that in the last 10,000 years, despite the fact that we've invented agriculture, we've invented cities, we've invented telecommunications, the social networks that the Hadza make are just like ours. Mathematically and visually, their friendship patterns look like our patterns. And my laboratory has asked people to identify their friends in a number of ways, and we have mapped social networks in many places. For example, in villages everywhere, in Honduras, in India, in Uganda, and in other places where we have worked, the mathematical structure of networks is the same. Here, every dot is a person. Every line between the dots represents a friendship or a relationship between two people. And you can see when you look at this image that the social structure of villages, how people interact with each other, is the same wherever you go. There's something deep and fundamental about our friendship patterns and the social networks they give rise to everywhere in the world. Very pertinently, however, elephants and dolphins also have friendships, and their networks look very similar to ours as well, mathematically speaking. This is an elephant social network. These are the friendships among elephants. The last common ancestor we had with elephants was 85 million years ago, but still, they make friends and networks in ways that are very similar to our own. Natural selection, it seems, has independently come up with this very uncommon practice. Friendships have evolved more than once, but rarely. We have friendships, certain other primates have friendships, elephants have friendships, and certain whale species have friendships. And that's pretty much it. This is known as convergent evolution, when organisms independently evolve to be similar, solving similar challenges in similar ways. These two cute creatures shared a common ancestor over 200 million years ago that looked nothing like this, and yet they independently evolved in such similar ways in the more recent past. So on the left is an echidna that's found in Australia, on the right is a hedgehog that's found in Europe. They look similar, but they independently came up with this type of strategy for survival. And we usually think about this process with respect to physical features, but it's not limited in that way. In fact, this observation about the convergent evolution of friendships and of social networks leads us to another paradox. To the extent that we resemble animals in our propensity for friendship or other traits like cooperation, we gain insight into our own common humanity. And the argument is this: if we can share the capacity for friendship with elephants, surely we can share it with each other. One of the ironies is that when you find these traits of the social suite in other species, it heightens our confidence that these traits are universal in our species, and they are found in societies all around the world. Now, the actual structure of these networks we make also matters. Think about these two objects. And as we all learned in high school chemistry class, these are both made of carbon. And on the left, you have graphite, which is soft and dark. And on the right, you have diamond, which is hard and clear. And there are two key intellectual ideas here. First of all, these properties of softness and darkness and hardness and clearness are not properties of the carbon atoms, They are properties of the collection of carbon atoms. And second, which properties you get depends on how you connect the carbon atoms to each other. Connect them one way, you get one set of properties. Take the same carbon atoms and connect them another way, you get a totally different set of properties. And it's the same with human groups. You can take a group of people and connect them one way, and they are healthy and happy and cooperative and friendly and innovative. Or you take the same human beings and connect them in a different way, and they are unhealthy and unhappy and uncooperative and uninnovative. So it's the ties between people that make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. New properties such as cooperation can emerge because of the connections, because of the ties between people, and not necessarily because of the people themselves. Like the shipwreck example I gave earlier. People are connected one way, they work together. Take the same people, connect them a different way, and they are not able to work together. So it's not just what's happening in the people around us that matters. Our experience of the world also depends on the actual structure of the ties around us, near and far. Collective social structure has emergent properties, and social order, which we are pre-wired to make, matters. Now, this phenomenon of emergence, where groups can have properties that are not present in the individuals themselves, has other consequences. The social suite itself has come to be shaped by natural selection in a variety of ways as a result. We make these intricate social worlds for ourselves, and these worlds, it turns out, affect us as much as we affect them. Now, one set of ideas regarding the mechanism of this relates to the notion of what I call an exophenotype, whereby genes guide an animal to create things outside of its body. Consider a beaver dam. This is a dam that beavers make. They take sticks and they form a dam and they dam the water. And as a result of damming the water, they create a lake behind the dam. So the beaver changes its environment. Instead of living in a narrow little river or a creek, it lives in a big pond because of the dam that it makes. And the genes of the beaver guide it to make a dam no less than they guide the beaver to grow a flat tail. So the genes of the beaver regulate the body of the beaver, the genes of the beaver regulate the behavior of the beaver, and the genes of the beaver regulate the environment of the beaver. The beaver changes its environment because of the genes that it has. But here's the interesting thing that happens as a result of that. The beaver changes its environment, and so therefore it changes the selection pressure that acts on the beaver. Now beavers with bigger lungs do better, survive better, because they can swim more in the bigger ponds that the beaver makes. So beavers now create a selection pressure, a Darwinian selection pressure on their own bodies. They change the trajectory of their own evolution. So this thing that the beaver makes creates new selection pressures, not just on other animals. For example, new fish could evolve to live in the new ponds that the beaver makes. This thing that the beaver makes changes its own body across time. So beavers make bigger dams. Beavers with bigger lungs do better when beavers make bigger dams. Beavers with bigger lungs then want to make bigger dams, and beavers with bigger dams then make the environment better for beavers with bigger lungs. Back and forth, back and forth. The organism changes its environment, the environment changes the organism, and it has within itself the capacity to change its evolution. Well, humans have evolved to manipulate the social world around us. We knit together our friendships just like beavers knit together sticks. We take our friendships and make social networks. They take sticks and make beaver dams. And we modify the social world around us, And this in turn makes certain types of genes more advantageous than others by creating a feedback loop across evolution. Friendly people make friendly worlds and do better in friendly worlds. And the same with cooperative people. We make particular sorts of social worlds, and those who can do well in such social worlds grow more numerous, as do their genes. Now, the traits that make up the social suite are mutually supportive. Many of these traits play roles in other traits. So, for example, identity is crucial for love and friendship and cooperation. And friendship is crucial for networks and cooperation. And friendship and networks create environments in which teaching and hierarchy can take place. And teaching is very important for cooperation. All of these traits reinforce each other and work together to create a very particular kind of society. Now, I want to say a few words about teaching, which lies at the root of our capacity for culture. Most animals learn. In fact, almost every animal can learn. A little fish in the sea can learn that if it swims up to the light, it will find food there and be able to eat. That's called independent learning. But some animals can learn socially by imitating other animals. This is extremely efficient. You put your hand in the fire, you burn your hand, you've learned that fire burns, but you've paid a price by putting your hand in the fire. I can look at you putting your hand in the fire, and I gain almost as much knowledge, but I pay none of the price. So you eat red berries and you die. I watch you eat the red berries and I learn, don't eat red berries. That is extremely efficient, that kind of social learning. But we don't just do that. We do something else. We teach each other things. We set out to teach you how to build a fire. And this is extremely rare in the animal kingdom. Very, very rare, but it's universal in us. Every group of people around the world teaches their members other things. And in fact, this ability allows us to cumulatively create and store knowledge and transmit the knowledge across time and place. It allows us to be cultural animals, in fact. And the knowledge we transmit across time and space in the form of teaching is a fundamental driver of economic growth. So think about this. On the day you were born, you inherited all the wisdom that had been created by all the people who had come before you. Animals had already been domesticated. Cows and goats and sheep and pigs, for example. And people had already discovered ways to take care of those animals. Those animals and that knowledge was there and was just given to you. Or calculus had already been invented by Newton. You learned calculus in high school because Newton invented it hundreds of years ago. Or astronomy and navigating by the stars. The day you were born, you were given that knowledge too. All of this knowledge, all of this wealth that had been created by other people and that was transmitted across time was given to you as a birthright, which allowed you to have a different life than you would have had if you had been born 1,000 or 10,000 years ago. This ability to create culture, to maintain knowledge, to transmit it across time and across space is very rare in the animal kingdom, but it's universal in us. And in turn, this shapes us even more. Our genes affect our capacity for culture, and our culture affects our genes. This is a further different idea than the sort of innate formation of social networks and exophenotypes I just mentioned. I mentioned another idea with a beaver dam. The beavers have to make a particular kind of dam, but when it comes to culture, each group of people can have different cultures, but those cultures can also affect our evolution. The best example we have of this, of how macro-historical developments could affect our genes, is the evolution of lactose tolerance in adults. The ability of adults to digest lactose confers evolutionary advantages only when a stable supply of milk is available. So 10,000 years ago, only babies could digest milk. When you're young and you drink milk from your mother's breast, you have enzymes in your body called lactase that allow you to digest the sugars in the milk called lactose, okay? But once you were weaned, you no longer had the ability to digest lactose. Why? Because you never drank milk again for the rest of your life. Until 10,000 years ago, there was no milk in the environment. There was no reason to be able to digest lactose, so nobody could do it. And then, multiple times between 3,000 and 9,000 years ago, human beings domesticated animals that made milk. Cattle and goats and sheep and camels. And now suddenly, because of something the humans did, there's milk in the environment. So those among us who could digest milk, who had mutations that made it possible for us to digest milk, had another source of food not available to everyone else, and another source of hydration not available to everyone else. These were advantages. And as a result, the genes that made it possible for us to digest milk into adulthood began to spread, so that now about half the population of the globe can digest milk into adulthood. Now the point, and these mutations incidentally, studies have shown by Sarah Tishkoff and others, studies have shown that these mutations only occurred in groups of people who actually herded animals, not in otherwise similar nearby groups of people who did not. So something we learn to do and that we do to change our environment can change the course of human evolution. Our genes and our culture are in conversation. And there are many amazing examples of this. I think that once we invented cities and increased population density, I think human beings became smarter. I think we changed the landscape to make cities. I'm not saying that urban people are smarter than rural people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when we create a world in which there are cities, we change the environment, and so we change the challenges that human beings face in a way that changes the capacities we have in our brains. Well, there are a number of applications of these ideas about how we have evolved to make societies. For instance, we humans have begun to modify our social systems with artificial intelligence. We are increasingly, by adding machines such as driverless cars and autonomous agents such as online bots, changing our social systems. So we're beginning to live in a world in which we have a society. Some of the members of the society are real people, and some of the members are machines. So you drive down the highway, some of the other cars are being driven by people, and some of the other cars are being driven by machines. This changes your behavior. And these hybrids and these machines will act in human-like ways on a level playing field, as if they were human, in what I call hybrid systems. And these hybrid systems of humans and machines offer opportunities for a new kind of social artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence might act socially or might also actually affect our social organization. Let me give you one example. So there are these online digital assistants or these digital assistants like Alexa. And when the manufacturer of something like Alexa builds the device, it builds the device to be very obedient. So you can talk to the machine and you say, Alexa, play music. You do not have to say, excuse me, Alexa, I'm very sorry to interrupt you, but I would be very grateful, please, if you would play some music. You just speak rudely to the machine. And the machine is designed this way. No one is going to sell a machine that requires you, the buyer, to make a lot of effort to get the machine to do what you want. But the problem is when your children use the machine, they learn to be rude. And then they go to the schoolyard and they are rude to other children. So the way the children interact with each other is being modified by the addition of this machine into our midst, into this hybrid system. And the way people drive on the road is going to be changed by the way driverless cars drive on the road. So the interactions between people, not between people and machines, the interactions between people change when we add forms of artificial intelligence into our societies. And in fact, we've been doing a lot of experiments in my lab to explore these ideas. In one experiment, we added bots to online groups of humans, and we showed how the bots can make it easier for groups of humans to work together by helping the humans to overcome friction in their efforts to coordinate their actions. So we were able to program these bots to make it possible for the humans to work better together, to improve the functioning of the society in which the humans were embedded. And my argument is that hybrid systems will need to respect the social suite if we are to work together towards a utopian rather than a dystopian future. Now, our focus on the social origins of goodness, as I've been doing so far, also highlights something else. Most human virtues are social, and they arise from the investments we make in the lives of others. We do not care very much if you love yourself, or are kind to yourself, or are just to yourself. We care whether you love others, or whether you are kind to others, or whether you are just to others. We care whether you manifest these virtues to other people. So I'd like to close with one final idea. What accounts for our species' general success in living together in the face of all of our defects and differences? How can we understand the goodness of the social world despite the badness? Now, in the field of theology, this is known as the question of theodicy, or God's justice. How is God to be justified in the face of all the evil in the world? How can we make sense? The theologians, the medieval theologians, wrestled with this question. If God is omnipotent and omniscient and beneficent, why is there so much evil in the world? Why are we so cruel to each other? How can we explain this? Well, I believe, analogously, that we can focus on what I call sociodyssey. This is the vindication of our confidence in the virtue of society despite its numerous failures that are so obvious to anyone. And it's in keeping with the Japanese aesthetic philosophy of wabi-sabi, which highlights the flawed beauty of natural and artificial things. So in Western tradition, beautiful objects are perfect and symmetrical. But in this Japanese aesthetic tradition and philosophy, imperfect objects are beautiful. This is a beautiful bowl. Despite its crack, despite its lack of symmetry, it's a beautiful bowl. What do in St. Petersburg or in Versailles? We trim our bushes to be perfect squares and circles and pyramids. What do the Japanese do? They make bonsai trees, broken, asymmetric, crooked, imperfect trees, which are beautiful despite their lack of symmetry, despite their lack of perfection. Well, I don't think this is just idle optimism. This recognition of the fundamental good that lies within us is a key part of what I'm after today. It's tempting to look at human history as full of abject misery and dysfunction. It's tempting to focus on the defects, and you can pick any century or millennium and find it replete with horrors. You can find warfare and violence and torture and cruelty from all times in all places. But that's not the interesting thing about us. The interesting thing about us is the beauty that our species has despite these defects. Now, there was, of course, a dramatic inflection for the better that occurred in the 18th century with the arrival of the Enlightenment and its philosophical values and scientific discoveries. So beginning about 200 or 300 years ago in Europe, there were a series of scientific advances and technological innovations. and a series of philosophical changes about the equality of human beings and the importance of democratic rule that began in Europe and spread throughout the world. And these ideas have made the world better today. We live longer, are safer, more peaceful, better fed than human beings have been since any time in the past. But my argument is that we do not need to rely just on such recent historical developments to make the world better. As I've been showing you today, more ancient, more powerful, and deeper forces are at work, propelling a good society. In short, my argument is that the arc of our evolutionary history is long, but it bends towards goodness. Thank you.
Ваши громкие аплодисменты. Николас Christakis. Браво.
Thank you to Nicholas Christakis. Let us applaud to him. And we're ready for the Q&A session. I see a small group of people ready to ask the first questions. Yes, we will connect Nicholas to a headset with the translation. Just 1 second. So let me emphasize what you need to do. So please introduce yourself before you ask your question, then ask your question, and make sure our questions are to the point, that they're interesting not only to Nicholas but to the rest of the people. So please introduce yourself, and one person, one question. My name is Anatoly, Moscow. Nicholas, thank you very much for your lecture. Here is my question. Let us discuss the future and hybrid systems that you mentioned. Last year, there was another forum, the Social Forum, where the Japanese futurologists spoke about the future of humanity in 2050. What awaits the future humans in those times? This interaction between robots and humans, what it will look like, and also about the types of people. As a sociable person, will I interact with a robot or a human? Or if I'm an introvert, would he or she select to interact with a robot, and that person would not need humans at all? So in brief, what is the future of human beings? Will they interact with each other or with robots only?
That I'm very optimistic about the prospects of human beings, and I am not afraid of technology. So I don't think that these technological innovations are going to affect us over short time horizons. What I've been showing to you is over thousands of years. I do think it's the case that because we have invented robots, the human beings that are alive in 1,000 years or 5,000 years will be different. For example, I'll give you an example. Let's say that the capacity to recognize individual faces becomes less important if the robots are among us and they don't have faces. Then this capacity to recognize faces will disappear over thousands of years, but not over 50 years, is part of my answer to your question. The second thing I'll say is, imagine new technologies like Google Glass that might recognize the faces of everyone that you interact with, and then be connected to the internet and call up information about that person. So, this is Nicholas Christakis, he's a friend of yours, you don't have to worry about him, here's a little information about his biography. Well, this ability that has been crucial to our species for thousands of years, now suddenly the technology will replace. So people that no longer are able to tell the difference between other people or remember will survive and become more numerous. And over thousands of years, this will change the kind of species we have. So part of my answer is that over a long time, things will change. Over a short time, I don't think they'll change. Over a short time, they will change, however, socially. So genetically, we won't change, but they'll change socially, and that increasingly we will be interacting with robots, there's no doubt.
Да, большое спасибо за вопрос. Пожалуйста, следующий вопрос задавайте, не забудьте.
Please, next question. Please don't forget to introduce yourselves and make sure we hear you.
Lecture. My name is Елизавета Забелина, and my question is the following. you are building the networks, showing the connection between people in the real world. But every person in that fabric is also a netizen, the citizen of the internet. On your opinion, do these imaginary online connections between people dissolve or consolidate the network? Do they need to be monitored as well? Thank you.
The work we've done, and that many other laboratories have done, show that the structure of interactions we make online is mathematically the same as the structures we make offline. So the example I like to give of this is the following story. If you could talk to my Greek grandmother, who was born in a little village in southern Greece more than 100 years ago, she's been dead for a while. If you could have talked to her when she was a 10 or 11-year-old girl living in this village in the south of Greece, and you had asked her, how many friends do you have? She would say, I have 1 or 2 best friends, and there are 4 or 5 of us girls that are a little group. And if you asked my daughter the same question when she was 10 or 11, even though she had an iPhone in her pocket, she would give you the same answer. So there are some deep and fundamental things about us, like our desire for friendship, our capacity to have 1 or 2 best friends, and have 4 or 5 intimate people, that doesn't change, even though the technology that we invent, like online networks, does change. So my answer to you is that I think we use those technologies in the service of ancient fundamental properties. Now, there are some things that these technologies change, yes. For example, your capacity to monitor large numbers of people. You can keep track of all of your high school friends now in a way that you could not. And the capacity to organize, to work together is easier with this technology. But the fundamental reality of who we are, I do not think has changed as a result of that technology.
Большое спасибо за ваш вопрос. Пожалуйста, продолжаем дальше. У нас есть еще...
Thank you. We have another 9 minutes. So if not everyone is able to ask their questions.
Okay.
I'm a professor, so, once you ask me to speak, I just keep speaking.
Okay, Nicholas, thank you for your lecture. It was great and fascinating. My question is partly being answered, but I want to interpret it in a different way. You see, in this day and age, the people that used to be connected with each other are more and more disconnected. You know, the whole concept of together alone. Like you say, you do not have to be a good man to order a pizza. You just pay the money and they deliver to you. This sort of isolation kind of scares me. So what do you think? What are the ways to prevent this and rich get richer, poor get poorer, and they more connected with themselves and isolating from each other, but we need each other to build a better future and make social connections. So what's your antidote of this modern day problem? Thank you.
So I will answer that again in a way similar to other questions about how cultural and historical forces are changing us. You are right. These technologies like food delivery services or internet are changing the way we interact. You're right. I'm not saying that there are no changes. Part of my answer is that I have 3 parts to my answer. The first part of my answer is that while there are changes, those changes are not affecting our fundamental humanity, which is what interests me. So all of the traits, the love and so forth that we've been discussing today aren't changed by any of the technologies modern technologies or historical factors. First point. Second point, there has always been with every technology a kind of moral panic. So when the telephone was invented, people were very worried that in the olden days, you would get on your horse, you would ride to your neighbor's house in the adjoining town. If you got sick, you would stay there for 3 weeks and recover while you were there. There was face-to-face interaction, and people were very worried that with the invention of the telephone, all of that would disappear and we wouldn't have friends anymore. People were really worried that we wouldn't interact face-to-face anymore. Of course, that's not what happened, right? The telephone was supplementary. So that's the second part of my answer, is that I don't have a kind of fear that this technology is going to destroy our society. But the third part of my answer is that you are right. that there are things that are made worse by this. For example, I think the rise in teenage suicide in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Russia, and depression, because of the increasing sense of alienation that people have when they use online media, I think is a problem. So there are things I think we can do, like with any technology, to make sure we get the benefits with fewer of the harms.
Thank you.
Да, большое спасибо вам за вопрос. Пожалуйста, продолжаем дальше.
Thank you. The next one, please ask your questions. Thank you for your lecture. Here is my question. Today, in spite of the internet and other communications and globalization, we see that different communities or cultures are very different. Some are more democratic. There are democratic countries and there are authoritarian countries. And relationship between a boss and a subordinate are different in different cultures. Can we say that people tend to create more similar societies in the future? And can we say that today some societies are better than the others at present, that they have more benefits than the others?
Question. I'll answer the last part first. I am not a person who believes in moral relativism, which means that you can't judge other ways of living. I think it is possible to look at different ways of living and say, this way of living is better for human flourishing than this way of living. So, for example, societies that treat women as second-class citizens, I don't think that's a good way of living, right? I think that that's not, I look at that and say that's not the right way to organize to maximize human flourishing. So the last part of your question is, I don't think all cultures are equal. I do think it's possible to make judgments about better or worse cultural features. For example, in the United States, we have this culture of gun ownership, where there's a lot of ownership, private ownership of guns. And I don't think that's a healthy way for society to be organized, to have people able to kill each other when they get into disputes. So you can look and say, this is good, this is not good. I think you can do that. On the former thing, I'm often asked whether the work that I'm doing has political implications. And I don't think that there is only one correct political way to organize human beings, but I do think that political systems that try to suppress the social suite will fail. So, for example, cultures in the book I talk about, in Blueprint, I talk about there was one society that tried, for example, to suppress play in children, to keep children from playing together, for example, by burning their hands every time they go to reach for a toy. This is not sustainable. Or another society that tried to prevent young people from being in love. That society was organized around sex, not around love. Most other societies have love. That's not sustainable. There have been examples of societies that have tried to make people suspicious of each other so that there's no friendships, so you don't know who to trust. That's not sustainable either. So political systems that try to go against our natural tendencies will not work over the long term. Over the short term, yes, but not over the long term.
Большое спасибо. Пожалуйста, у нас еще есть 3 минуты. Задаем следующий вопрос.
We have 3 more minutes. Nicholas, thank you. My name is Alla Popova. Here's my question. You said that teaching takes place like this. You look at the person burning fingers and you learn. Does it mean that in a society we should always have a victim, always have pain for the society to learn? In other words, do we really need to have a war to make people love and live in peace? In society, there are so many examples of people suppressed by the society. They were ousted by the society, but those societies did not learn from that. More people like that appeared in those societies again.
Happen to pick the burning. First of all, there's a difference between social learning and teaching. Social learning is when you look at her and see what she's doing and learn something. Teaching is when she teaches you to do something, which is extra, is something different. There's independent learning, number one, you learn on your own. Social learning, you look at others and learn on your own. And teaching, which is the other people actually teach you things, 3 different things. I happen to give examples where the other person is suffering, but I didn't need to do that. I could teach you how to find plants to eat, right? I don't have to put my hand in the fire. I can say, come with me. I'll show you how to find food. This is how you dig for roots, for example. So I do not think that pain is necessary for learning, but I do agree that pain often causes learning. And the ancient Greeks had an expression for this, which is pathemathos. Through suffering comes knowledge. But it's not the only way to get knowledge.
Да, дорогие друзья, спасибо огромное за вопрос. У кого...
Thank you very much. Does translation work well? Okay.
Your research gives the answer what we should do as a society. When you describe the example of 2 shipwrecks, what was the distinction between the 2? Is it the leader? Is it some moral principles? Is it, I don't know, religious fundamentals that guided these people to behave differently? Because you answered what is the result, that people that are fundamentally good are behaving good and building better societies. But what we should do to create this, since we're in a healthcare community, when we create a magical pill that you will give to a person and it will bring all the best that is inside the person. Thank you.
So again, my answer would be, and I discuss all the examples in the book, my answer would be that groups of people that are able to respect let me give you an analogy. If you have genes in you that make you have a certain body with kidneys and a certain height and an ability to run and do certain things, if I starve you as a child, you won't naturally make a body that's able to do those things. You'll have a stunted body. You'll be less able. Or if I expose you to a toxin that kills your kidneys won't be able to work and do the job they were supposed to do. So my argument about societies is that you can have deformed societies just like you can have deformed bodies. Outside forces can take us away from the kind of natural order that we might make. When we are able to make such a natural order, we cooperate, teach, are kind to each other, love each other. We also do awful things. I know this. But the good things outweigh the bad things. That's my argument. And there are certain kinds of cultural, political, economic, and other arrangements which can try to take us away from the natural order. Just like you can starve a body, you can starve a society. And so my argument is that we want those kinds of macro-historical, macroeconomic, macro-political arrangements that support healthy flourishing of societies.
Большое спасибо. Ну что ж, дорогие друзья, ваши громкие...
Thank you very much. Let us thank Nicholas for his outstanding talk and answers. It was great to listen to you, Nicholas Christakis. Once again, let us applaud to Nicholas. Thank you for your lecture.
Ну что ж, дорогие друзья, мы с вами продолжаем буквально совсем скоро. У нас небольшой...
So shortly we're going to have a break, and you will be able to listen to all the other lectures and take part in the interactive shows. We will have a lecture on the hypnoticist, Paul McKenna, a coach who will present his unique technology based on a long-time experience with addicted people. And the lecture is titled 10 Steps to Say No to Sugar. So please come back to listen to Paul McKenna in a couple of hours.
Участники 18-й ассамблеи «Здоровая Москва». При выходе из зала, пожалуйста, сдайте устройство синхронного перевода. Спасибо за понимание.